Okay, as usual, I'm walking one of the horses back. This is my horse Sundance. Okay, so I've talked about tripping before and focus, and hopefully you can hear me because I know it's windy, but I don't want to be that close to the phone. It scares me when I look back at it. So these horses drag their feet across the top of the ground, and that's what makes some of them more trippy. The pacier ones are even more trippy because they're more lateral and it's harder for them to catch themselves versus that diagonal gait. So if your horse is tripping, what should you do? Well, of course, do the other things I said in my video, but when they actually trip, what I do is yank up on the reins, hit them with my legs, either kick them or spur them. If I have a stick, I tap them with a stick. I try to scare them because you don't want them to think tripping or stumbling is an okay thing to do. You want it to scare the horse, because when you scare them, they will jump up, so they will most likely catch both of you. So if your reins are too long, you're not going to be able to yank that horse up very well. So you want the reins, even if you are riding on a longer rein, short enough that you could yank up and help that horse to get up. A lot of times if these guys trip, they fall forward and they'll push down on that bit. If you pull up while they're doing that, you actually give them some support and they'll actually be able to get themselves up. Over the years I've seen it, both ways, where somebody helped the horse when it tripped and yanked up on it. Horse a lot of times caught itself, and I've seen them not do anything, with long reins, and I've seen the horses trip, go down on their knees, and even roll over. So I think it's a much better idea to try to get them back up, because these guys just don't react like the other horses, like quarter horses and stuff, to catch themselves. So again, I try to scare them, make them jump up. The more they're stumbling, the harsher I'll get. In other words, more pressure I'll put on them and make sure that they are really paying attention. But remember, you don't want them to think tripping is an okay thing to do. You want them to think that's the worst thing to do, if possible. Now, if they trip, well, all the other horses trip in a spot and they trip too, well, there you go. But if it's a horse that's constantly tripping and you've worked it up and nothing's wrong with it, then you got to make sure it's paying attention. The other things I do is in the arena, I'll lunge them over poles a lot, like once or twice a week, big heavy poles, because I want them to be picking their feet up. And if they hit those poles, it's uncomfortable for them, so they'll want to pick their feet up higher in order not to hit them. So you can get those poles at Home Depot or some of the feed stores, but you're looking for a bigger, heavier pole. If the horse is not that trippy, you don't need as big a heavy pole, and you can use the timber logs that they use like in the gardening. But what you're trying to do is a couple of times a week make that horse pay attention and make him pick up his feet. The trottier the horses are when they're loose, the more they pick up their feet. So if you teach that horse to trot, or when it's loose you let him trot more, that also usually helps with the tripping. Then there's the footing. So you see, it's all uneven. If a horse isn't paying attention, I've said this a million times in my videos, and they're looking all over the place, right? Well, then they're not looking where they're going. Like I'm looking at the phone, I could trip on something. So always make sure they're paying attention, because a lot of times these horses, I'm out of breath, don't pay attention, and that's a reason they trip. Other thing is, when they trip, lean back as far as you can. I'm sure you've seen the buck and broncos, and if you haven't, just type it in YouTube so you can see a video, and you'll see their heads all the way back to their butt. When your horse trips, you want to lean back as far as you can. If you can lean back that far, lean back that far, because the more weight you get on their back end, the more they're going to be able to recover. If they trip, your top heavy or poor balance, you fall forward, you can knock a horse off its feet that normally was just going to stumble and catch itself. But you've thrown all the weight forward, so physics, motion keeps going. And then the horse falls over. So think of all those things. If that horse is tripping, is he not paying attention? Are you riding on too loose a rein? Is the horse looking around? Can he see the footing? And is it all covered with grass and there's holes? And then make sure they're paying attention. Sometimes when these horses, go too slow, they're bored. They're, most of the time they're not made to do that. So when the slower they go, the more bored they get, the less they pay attention, the trippier they get. So I tell people, give them little jobs to do. Stop, back up, do a shoulder in, do a leg yield, do a serpentine. Give them little jobs to do. And yes, you can let them go on a little bit looser rein in between, but every once in a while, pick them up and make sure they're paying attention. Otherwise, they're tired, they're going home, they're not paying attention, they're dragging those feet, and sooner or later they catch it on something. And then you got a horse that's starting to stumble all the time. Okay, now remember, as I said in other reasons, there's medical reasons they can trip too. But if this was a horse that just started tripping, it didn't trip before, or it's a new horse to you, most of the time the things that I just mentioned will fix the problem. All right, so Sundance and I are going to finish walking home. Okay, so when I say, look, I relaxed and she stopped, she's such a good girl. So when I say you're walking slow on the trail and the horse is not paying attention, like this is quarter horse walk, right? These horses get really bored when they're walking this slow, and then they look around and drag their feet and just like do, I'm so bored. So if you got one that's a little bit trippy, I collect them up, I get their head down, I make them flat walk. These horses were bred to gait. They weren't bred to walk real slow. So make them use themselves and pay attention. Doesn't mean, that you can't go back to walking real slow. Sure, I'm going to walk real slow now. See, she's looking around. I'm going to speed her up. I'm going to get her head down. She just stumbled. She wasn't paying attention. And then make them walk out again. So doesn't mean you can't go slow. You can, but, you want to keep waking them up. Making them pay attention. Maybe let's do a little leg yield off my right leg here. And then let's leg yield off the leg. You're just going to make yourself have a better horse and less trippy. So keep their attention. Keep them focused. Okay, going down hills, I do go slow. Especially if the horse has stifle issues, because I want them to use their muscles around their stifles and be really on their back ends. So I go slow, usually with their head kind of in between. And I watch the footing. So kind of like if you're a mountain bike rider, you watch where the rocks and all that stuff are. So if you like doing that, then gaited horses are probably for you, because since they drag their feet, it's good to watch your footing and just be aware how much your horse pays attention and how much it drags its feet. Will make you have a much safer ride. But again, going downhill, I go nice and slow. If I'm by myself, I might go faster if the horse is well balanced. These horses can go down really fast, so if they're on the trotty side, when you go downhill, it makes them lateral, so they'll be smooth. And since they have more of a diagonal gait from the trot, they'll be pretty steady going down this hill. But if your horse is on the pacey side, going down fast will just make them pace more. We'll make them more on their front end and make them more trippy, because they'll just be swinging their legs flying down the hill. So you want them to slow down, use themselves, walk correctly. And if you got a pacey horse, you might want to serpentine down the hill or leg yield. Give him things to do. Keep his attention. The more you can make that horse do some motions like the leg yield and the serpentine, the more you're trying to get it towards the trot and square up its gait. So it will help, and it will also help with that tripping. Okay, so once we get here, I'll start speeding the horse up. If I want it to walk out some and engage its back end. Now, if it can do it, if I let go of the reins without picking its head up, that'll be on a looser rein. But if it looks up or goes out of gait, then I will help collect it. And you'll see my hand right here. So if I loosen up, say I'm giving her a break for a minute, I kind of keep my hand up in the air. So if she were to trip, I could yank that hand up really quick and lean back and nudge her with my legs and get her to come up. Because again, I want to make any tripping very uncomfortable for her, so she doesn't want to do it, and so she pays more attention to her feet. Think about when you're walking on the rocks, right? Or like here in Folsom Lake, it's kind of rocky, or in the river. When you first go in, you're not paying attention because you don't know it's rocky. Well, it hurts your feet. So after that, you're very careful about getting in and out of the water because you know it's going to hurt your feet and be uncomfortable. And so, again, if tripping is uncomfortable for her, then she's going to try really hard not to do it. But if when she trips, I don't do anything about it, it doesn't bother her, she's like, oh, I tripped, you know, and it doesn't bother me, well, she's probably going to get more trippy because she's not going to pay attention. So you want to make it uncomfortable for them and make them pay attention to their feet. You know, you can always try the rolled toe, you know, or a square shoe, but if that's not working, you might want them to be barefoot. Bang a couple of those rocks so they feel what it's like to smack that foot. And then they might be less likely to hit that rock again and more likely to pick up their feet since it's very uncomfortable. So we're trying to be safe and help the horse, but also help ourselves stay back up here. And it's not a safe thing to be riding a trippy horse. So you want to catch it early in the beginning, not when they're really stumbling and falling down all over the place. So make your adjustments early on, and just know these horses are bred different, they're built different, so you can't ride them, as I've said a million times, like quarter horses. Well, I guess you can, but sooner or later something bad is probably going to happen. And it happens in all the breeds, because you might say, oh, mine doesn't do it, it's a foxtrotter, it's a Rocky Mountain. They can all trip. You talk to enough people, you'll hear bad stories about all of them. And then what you just don't know is, was something wrong with the horse, or was it really the rider? Was it riding it correctly and the horse isn't paying attention at all? So I teach all my clients, lean back, get their heads up when they trip, and really get after them. Don't be nice about it, because it's way too dangerous. It's better to wake that horse up and be a little bit mean than end up in the hospital with a broken leg, because that's usually what happens, is the horse falls down and lands on that person's leg. Okay? So be safe out there.